Hello, welcome to the Fox Cities Book Festival. We'll give a couple minutes to our attendees to trickle in here. Thank you for bearing with us a couple of minutes while we work through some technical issues. We've all set up now and we're ready to go. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone who's here today. Welcome to the 14th annual Fox Cities Book Festival. And today's event with Ava Homa. The title of her presentation today is From Self to Universe, Building Character Relationships. And we're super excited to have her. We are very happy to be here again virtually today, but look forward to gathering again in person next fall. The Fox Cities Book Festival continues to be offered for free to all of our community members, and today's program will be available for viewing after the live event on our Facebook page. So the Fox Cities Book Festival is organized by a group of dedicated volunteers and community members, including public libraries, school districts and universities, bookstores, and individuals that give of their time and talents. We are able to provide these great events without financial barriers thanks to our generous donors and supporters, and they understand the value that access to the arts has on the individuals, students, and our greater community. If you think that supporting local writers, building an engaged community of readers, introducing students to authors, and bringing free educational and arts events to our community is important, we encourage you to support the festival. The Fox Cities Book Festival is only possible because of our sponsors, and there are many ways that you can support the festival, and we thank you in advance for your donation and your time. So we ask that during the presentation today, our audience acts as good digital citizens, respecting our speaker and each other, following our code of conduct. Any harassment or disrespectful behavior or language will cause you to be removed from today's event. During the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our speaker using our Q&A function in Zoom. So please type your questions there. We look forward to hearing from you. And we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can during our time together. For those of you watching us on Facebook, please leave your questions and comments in the Facebook Live video, and we will make sure that we connect you to the author as well. So now for the moment you've been waiting for. Today, I am thrilled to introduce to you Ava Homa. Ava is a writer, journalist, and activist, specializing in women's issues and Middle Eastern affairs. She's the critically acclaimed author of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. Her collection of short stories, Echoes from the Other Land, was nominated for the 2011 Frank O'Connor Short Story Prize and is also the inaugural recipient of the PEN Canada Humber College Writers in Exile Scholarship. Homa has delivered speeches on writing as resistance, human rights, gender equality, Kurdish affairs, media literacy, and other topics. She has spoken in front of the United Nations regarding the effects of gender, economic, and political oppression of Kurdish women in Iran and Syria. We are thrilled to have you today, Ava. We can't wait to hear your presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Melanie, for that kind introduction. So I think I am going to go through certain slides to discuss building character relationship. This is designed mostly for writers because it turns out a lot of people who are interested in book festivals and author events are aspiring writers. And then Melanie and I will have a Q&A, and you're welcome to jump in with your questions anytime. Erin, if I could see the slides. Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot said and done about character development and characterization. I was going to specifically focus on building character relationships, and I look at it from 4 different perspectives. Erin, next slide, please. Thank you. I'm interested to know how many of you are writers and what genre you're writing in. If you could please type that in the chat box, that would be amazing. Melanie did a perfect job of introducing me. So these are the cover photos for my books. The first one, I have two cover photos because one is Canadian, published by HarperCollins. I had two different publishers, and the other one is by Abrams, Daughters of Smoke and Fire. And then my first book was a collection of short stories, Echoes from the Other Land. Erin, I need you to quickly just press next, next, next a few times. Thank you. So it's one thing to know what kind of relationship characters have, but it's also interesting to see how authors tend to reveal that, and that's something that could be of interest to us for both as readers and as writers. And I guess the question that I like to always ask myself is not just who my characters are, but how do they position themselves in relation to others and their environment. I'm also looking at um, how their societies also perceive them, because they may not always match, in the sense that um, a character who only thinks of themselves as, say, American will may be perceived as, you know African American. And regardless of how which part of that hyphenated identity the character focuses on, you want to look at how they see themselves and how they position themselves in society, but also how society perceives them. Erin, thank you. um, so the so it's not just that, not only who they are and how they position themselves and how they're perceived. It's also interesting to look at how characters slowly reveal themselves, because we each reveal only a portion of ourselves depending on who we're interacting with. Our online personalities don't necessarily match who we are at work, or different types of friends that we deal with. They get to see different aspects of who we are, and what we decide to reveal and focus on in our interaction with others makes a big difference in depending on the situation. So when it comes to character revelation from an author perspective, you could also think of, if you are thinking of gradually revealing who your characters are, you could put them in different settings, in different chapters, and let them do that revelation slowly. And it's even more interesting if the person and the persona that they're revealing don't necessarily match each other. Like someone who is very patient at work might be completely irritable at home, or vice versa. Might not be a very nice person at work, but very nice and patient when it comes to dealing with their family. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so each slide, yeah. So I guess then that building character relationship really depends on what kind of novel you're thinking that you're going to offer the world. Um, some people are only interested in writing for entertainment, and there is nothing wrong with that. And there are others who want to offer something beyond an entertainment. They want to offer an experience. They want to offer insight, and ideally would like to shift something within their readers, or at least a portion of their readers. As an author, I am hungry for books that create that shift in me, books that makes me feel like I am growing and developing with the characters while this is happening. Next. Yeah, and even though there are MFAs and things like that that are supposed to show you things and show you techniques, you really learn it from the masters in this craft. Look at novels that have um, created the effect that you're looking for in you, and go back and reread them, this time from an author's perspective. Don't read it to see how it affects you as a reader. Read it to see how the author managed to create that effect. Next. Okay. So to do that, I've looked at four different levels of relationship that characters can have. Obviously, it starts with self, and you can say in so many ways that's the foundation for how we're building relationship with everyone else. Relationship with family and friends, then relationship with society at large, global understanding and perspective, especially with our today's world where we are, or we can be aware of. Um, what is going on in the rest of the world because of living at the age of internet, and also living in a world where some 80 million people are currently displaced. That means um, a lot of us live in non-homogeneous societies, so it's not just something that happens on the other side of the world. It also shapes the colleagues that we deal with, people that we come across, the neighborhoods that we live in. And then eventually something that's the hardest type of relationship to define, and that's a relationship with a much larger universe, something beyond our human relationships. And in that sense, you can look at your character's relationship with planet Earth, with things spiritual and religion. Next. um, Something I constantly repeat in my classes is that we as novelists really need to know all these things, but they don't have to make it into our stories, in the sense that we don't have to lecture our readers about how we're building this relationship, but what we know of these totally shapes how we write our stories. One of the creative writing exercises I like to give my students is that I ask them to write about a person who just walked by our classroom, or in the courtyard of wherever, if it's a campus or a library where the classes hold. And then I ask them to picture someone they know really well, a partner, a best friend, a family member, doing the same thing, just taking the walk or crossing the street. And I asked them to do that because obviously, when they know this person is still doing the same action of walking, when you know that character on a deeper level, the way you write about them, the way you even describe their walk, makes a big difference. So there's a lot that I do in the beginning of my before I have the actual story. I have before I have the novel or start with chapter one. I write 10, 20,000 words of trying to understand how my character was conceived, and how their first experiences was when they first fell in love, when they first broke a bone, and things like that. And that writing obviously stays in the draft form forever, but it really helps me understand how my different characters then react to different events that are happening in their life. Um, The other thing is, we need to be able, if we want to convey a strong sense, especially emotions, in our book, we need to be able to feel those feelings ourselves. And so getting to know our characters better helps us feel their feelings. And once we feel it, then it comes through your writing. It's not always easy because our characters might have different areas of specialties, different types of personalities, different ways of looking at life. And so that's when research comes in, and research is not just finding out facts and figure. It's thinking about how your character would see the world. For example, if you think about three different characters who walk inside a restaurant, depending on what their jobs are, they would notice different things. A novelist would sit down and try to overhear conversations and see how people phrase their ideas and what they tend to talk about. An architect would look at how the restaurant is built, would look at the architecture. An interior designer would be more aware of the colors that are used, or the interior decoration that is used inside that restaurant. So that's where research comes in. Like, we have to know how our characters would look at the world, and obviously they won't all see the same. They won't There's no one objective reality that all our characters see. They will see it and perceive it in different ways. Next. Okay. So, as I said, I strongly believe that our relationship with ourselves really determines our relationship with others. If you look at people who are constantly nagging and complaining and they're finding fault with everyone, they're also not really calm within their own skin. They tend to also harbor a lot of self criticism, which they project outwardly, even though they may not be aware of it. On the other hand, people who tend to be more forgiving, they're the one who are somewhat at home at their own heart, at their own mind. So it really affects everything. It affects how we perceive other people, depending on how we look at ourselves. And it's not just the objective, just the physical appearances. We do have to sit down and decide how much our character weighs or how their physical appearances are, but it's also important to look at how they feel about who they are. If you have a character with a disability, how do they perceive their disability? If do you have a character that's um, perceived overweight by the society, but they're very confident and they go around the world as if um, remembering that this is just society's way of thinking, it doesn't apply to them? Or do you have a very quote unquote attractive character who's constantly self-critical and self-conscious? Next. Yeah, so these are the three questions I like to ask myself, not only who my characters are, but who do they think they are, and if when they pretend, because we do pretend at different settings in life, who do we pretend to be? And if your character had a choice, who would they prefer to be? So imagine, pretend, and prefer are the three things that I write on top of my page when I'm thinking about my characters and try to answer those questions. And this is where it comes back to not just what their features are, but how they think about their features. And I also have the question of how self-aware they are, and I'm using that in a very positive light, because um, not everybody brings enough awareness into their day. Obviously, we're going to have characters who just go through their life with enough consciousness to just not bump into objects, but they really are. It looks like they're on a trance. They rarely ever take the time to pause and think about who they are and where they go. And we knew those kind of characters. And every now and then we could also have a character who does pause, depending on, again, who they are. Maybe every day, every night before bed, they think about how they could be a better person the day after, or just think about it once a year during a vacation and then push it aside. So I guess this is also another thing we need to decide on when it comes to thinking about our character relationships. Next. Thank you. Um, Not every character has to be dynamic, but for me, the most rewarding novels are the ones where something changes in the character throughout the novel, but also that I, as a reader, change with the character throughout the novel. So this is one of the decisions we have to make as authors. Do we want our characters um, to kind of develop or evolve throughout the novel or not? Because if we start with a character that's like too perfect in the beginning, then we don't really have a story. Um, it won't be, because so much of our understanding of story through mythologies and through um, our attempts at defining who we are on this planet and where we are and what should be doing goes back to how we want to grow. So growth is really important. There should be some sometimes a lot, sometimes just a little bit of room for growth for your character. But so they shouldn't be too perfect, but at the same time, they shouldn't be too unlikable. Um, they should be what I think of as perfectly flawed character, so that readers can relate to them and can relate to their struggle and can kind of develop with them. In my novel, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, I have Layla, who's a very flawed character, and I have Schleer, her best friend, who is in so many ways my favorite character because she is just very brave from the beginning, and she has her own way of looking at life, and she just heads she deals with life head first. But I couldn't make Schleer my main character because I thought um, I need a more flawed character as my main character, and then she could be affected by her friends. And you might have all heard the expression "save the cat," um, which is the title of a book about screenplay and was later also adopted for novel writing. The idea is if your character does something like Aladdin did in the beginning. He's a thief, but he is willing to go and share his food with someone. If your character does something redeeming or pleasant in the beginning, despite their flaws, especially when you're thinking of not really positive or easily likable characters, then giving them having them do something in the beginning that makes them likable is important. Um, So it goes back to the very interesting idea of you don't want to have stereotypical characters, but you do want characters that are archetypal. And that's goes back to Joseph Campbell's studies of mythology and what uh, universally humans think of a story and the hero's journey and the hero with a thousand faces and things like that. So we need some archetype. That idea of there is this main character who has a conflict and has to overcome it. They want something and there are obstacles, right? In my novel, Layla wants to be a filmmaker. She's interested in arts, but she has all these obstacles in front of her and she has to overcome them one after the other. And sometimes even more problems arise as she's trying to overcome those. And then she becomes someone else at the end. She starts by being this character who doesn't even know if her life is worth living. And then she ends up not being able to help herself, but also reach out a helping hand and help others. Um, I just also wanted to point out that um, not only we need to know what your character, what the characters want to do, but also why they want to do. And for that level of motivation, you can always, you as a novelist can know something that your character won't necessarily know. For example, um, if your character wants to be a doctor, why are they really doing that? Are they trying to prove something to their father? Um, what ingrained that desire in them? And again, even if the character themselves aren't aware of it or aren't aware of it at the beginning, you knowing that as a novelist affects how you're writing the story. Next. So again, their relationship with friends and family makes a difference. Do they have friends? Not just how many, but really how meaningful is their friendship? How deep can they go when it comes to sharing a portion of who they are with their friends? And how secure or insecure they are when dealing with peers and family, and where do those insecurities stem from? When it comes to writing scene, I think about what my characters would say, but also what they wouldn't say. And oftentimes, what they can't express is carries more weight, is more important than what they end up saying. So, what they're saying, what they're not saying, and what they're doing while they're going through that scene um, are some of the questions that I ask myself. Next. Obviously, we talked about their character's relationship with society. Um, for my characters who are set in Iran, geopolitics plays a huge role in their lives, and I often wonder if I had the same characters living in a Scandinavian country with similar, family dynamics, similar genes, similar personality. How would that shift who they are? Um, do you want to create a character who's engaged in their society or not, and then to what extent and what type? Do they want to be involved in the neighborhood potluck, or do they volunteer um, to help at a local garden, or do they want to be part of a national charity? How much and in what ways do your characters engage with people around them? Next slide, please. Yeah, and that goes back to also you want to think about their politics, and I know that's such a heavy word in America now, and I've had readers who said, "Oh, are you? Do you believe in alienating your reader by talking about politics? Politics is not just about understanding if your character is leaning right, left, or right. Understanding your character politic also means." Can they hold complexity in their lives, or are they simple-minded people? Um, can they? How do they think about their country? Do they just have an ego attached to their country and they want to say, "My country is perfect just because I was born into it"? Or are they capable of understanding that a lot of time criticizing means loving and having a critical point of view of um, or you happen to be born, or if you have migrated to a new country, how you define your relationship to the host country. Um, those are decisions that when we think about, they really um, this is, I think, when I look at great novels, um, even if the novelists haven't outright told me where their characters stand politically, I still have a very good sense of how they relate to the world around them. And to me, that's the difference between um, a strong, a powerful, and a moving book, and a good book that's written cleverly, but it's not that deep. Is how much, to what extent novelists know their characters and these things about their characters. Um, in Daughters of Smoke and Fire, Layla is stateless, even though she lives in a country, but that's the country that doesn't allow her to learn her mother tongue. That's the country that has put all her loved ones into prison. So, in a sense, she does have a country, but she doesn't have a country. And what does that mean to be in a country officially and carry its passport, but to be stateless at the same time? Um, so that it's for me, it was the question of thinking about how that reality shapes her day-to-day life, how it shapes her self-perception, and what options does she have in a situation like that. Next. Um, yeah, but as I briefly mentioned, I think it's important for us novelists to think about our character's relationship with the world we live in today, um, and also who our characters like to be. You might have a character who doesn't like to be racist, but really, when push comes to shove, they deal with minorities completely differently than they deal with other people. So just understanding those nuances about our characters, I think, makes the story a lot more compelling and interesting. Not obviously every story out there, because books are written for different purposes and novelists have different things in mind. But I don't think it hurts to ask ourselves these questions of, um, when it comes to social justice, where does our characters stay? Are they a type of people who just mock ideas of affirmative action, or do they pretend to accept it and respect it, but really at the bottom of their heart, they're pissed about it because they feel threatened by it? Next. And finally, I think it's also important to ask ourselves, what kind of relationship do they have to things bigger than humans, and what does your character decide to call those things? Are they, a loud atheist? Are they secretly religious? Are they a follower of Buddha, Jesus? Um, who they are and what they think in terms of larger things also shapes how they speak with other characters, how they interact with everyone else, and in their most quiet moment when no one is around, also what kind of self-talk they have. Next. Um, yeah, so I wanted to see that from what I've seen of moving and powerful works, there's usually a change that happens throughout the novel, and that I, as a reader, feel like I can, if I don't change with the character, at least I believe why they change and how they change. And that change is not often too dramatic or hard to believe. I also see that really good novels are good at creating contradictions, but those contradictions that characters have is credible and within a range. So characters, just like people, aren't always consistent. Um, but then we know, as novelists, we have to create worlds that make sense, unlike the world we live in. And the character's motivation have to be clear and they have to be consistent. But at the same time, it's more interesting if there is some sort of contradiction within that consistency. Next. Yeah, so at Daughters of Smoke and Fire, I have Layla, who struggles with a lot of doubts and fears, unlike her best friend Schler, who still has doubts and fear, but a much smaller share of it. Um, so Layla doesn't have caring, nurturing parents, but she does find a parental figure for herself, and that parental figure plays the role of somewhat of a mentor for Layla later in life. When it came to thinking about her relationship with her family, as I thought, now that she can't build a deep relationship with her parents, it makes sense if she's overly attached to her brother, who seems to be her only ally in life. Um, Her understanding of cosmos shifts over time, as a child growing up in a leftist society, a leftist family, and then later when she experiences grief and she starts questioning a lot of things, and finally near the end when she finds some sort of peace. So it wasn't just for Leila, it wasn't just a growth, like it wasn't she didn't have the curve of a growth. She went up and she went down, and she kind of came back up and found a middle way at the end. um yeah, can we move on to the next? I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so just final friendly things that I thought great novelists do is that they gradually reveal the character, that it feels like I don't know everything about the character right off the bat. And in fact, by chapter 20, I learned something new. And by chapter 40, um, the character can even surprise me in a believable way, not out of the blue, but in a sense that I kind of expected this surprise or this twist to happen. Um, and I think, again, what's left untold on the page when it comes to dialogues was more interesting and appealing to me than what the characters actually said. Um, and I want to end on the note that publishing is really hard. It's not easy to get a book published. There's a lot that you will face, but if you go back to the why of writing, why you're doing this undertaking, then that's going to make a big difference in um, whether or not you want to keep pushing despite the obstacles and the hassles. Yep, I think that's pretty much it. That's my website. Please feel free to check avahoma.com, and there's also a contact form where you could contact me. And at one point, I will read a page of the book for you to get a sense of the style. But for now, I just want to open it up to Melanie. If anyone has any questions. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you so much, Ava. That was incredible. I do have a number of questions, but I just wanted to give you one from our audience member who did mention that they are working on a book in the sci-fi genre, and asks about all the qualities that you talk about for your characters. Do you develop or do you make an effort to develop all of your characters that well and want them all to meet those requirements, or are you really just thinking about your main character?
I usually think about 2 or 3 main characters. Obviously, you have one it's really their story, and then I think about at least 2 other characters that are major in the story. When it comes to minor character, I try to think of a way to make them somewhat memorable in the reader's mind. For example, if my character runs into a stranger in a cafe, um, I make sure that there is something about that stranger that's interesting, like if they have a birthmark, the shape of a tear on their face, or if they're wearing something specific. Um, I think those little things can help. And from what I've tried to learn from masters of novel writing, I feel like the less generic your characters are, the most appealing your book ends up to be.
Yes, thank you. So I was really struck by kind of the everyday trials that your characters faced, but really how fully developed and complex your characters were. So you kind of took that journey with them. I think that you did exactly what you talked about in your description, is you really created a story that makes you feel like you're growing and developing with those characters. So I mean, I can see exactly what you're talking about there and how deep your characters really were. They were not kind of this superficial glimpse at what a character is. They really felt fully realized. So great job. Um, Another question that just popped up. Do you know most of your story and the relationships between your characters before you start, or does that happen as you first write the draft?
I feel like for different stories and characters, they're different. Obviously, even when I do have a rather clear idea of what the story is going to be, um, it won't necessarily remain the same after I go through several drafts, and I go through a lot of drafts. Um, I tend to start with a vague idea of what I want to say and what the story is and who they're going to be. And that's when I start my free writing. That's when I do several pages of who I think they are, and how they're going to change throughout the course of the novel. If it is like 20 years or if it's just 2 hours, what's going to happen. So things become clearer as I go through the process. Um, I'm not really a planner in the sense that I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I still leave room for figuring things out. For me, it's more a process of discovery than as opposed to know right away and then create what I know from the beginning.
Wonderful. I think if this is a good time, I'm happy to have you read a little bit from the book and show us your characters.
Thank you. Um, so I'm just reading the prologue, which is only a page, and it starts with a pivotal moment in Layla's life. A woman alone on the mountain at dusk. An invisible boot pressed against my throat, making my breath labored and helpless. And yet I couldn't go back and face my parents or my stifled future. Hidden behind a boulder, I hugged my knees and imagined my rage and pain whirling into a wildfire, burning all the injustices. Could my father have known what was going on? I wanted to tell him, to share this burden with him. My shoulders were already heavy beneath the daily cruelties of living as a woman in Vanatawa, the damn place. This fatigue was incurable. The sun had suntered down, disappeared behind Lake Srebar. A dozen shades of red burst open along the horizon. Below, the narrow, winding asphalt road was the hem around the hill's green skirt, embroidered with clusters of red and yellow wildflowers. The Schiller flowers, and that's the flower on the page. They're called crown lilies here. The Schiller flowers stood elegant and tall, flourishing across the rough Kurdistan plateau, defying borders. I yearned to be a Schiller, but I was a garden of anguish, of loathing, of torment. My occupied homeland was a birthplace of death. I stood up, my breath now coming in pants. I wasn't hiding anymore. Bessa, Bess, I shouted. It's enough, enough. I started down the hill in a tumbling run and found myself unable to stop. Despite the chill of the evening, I started sweating. The wind whipped my headscarf and I gained speed. I flapped as if I had wings. As I ran, a wail escaped my chest. I was headed toward the main road, toward the world of men. The streets belonged to them, judgmental men, hypocritical men. Their honor depended on women, men. Cars hurtled around the curve, full of drunk drivers who honked as they spotted me sprinting down this hillside. They were going too fast for this road, too fast for their sluggish reflexes, and too fast for their old vehicles. A white, late model car careened down the winding road, kicking up dust. The wind roared in my ear. The white car and whoever was driving it seemed to seek me out as a fellow traveler. I stumbled on a stone, crushing the shiny red poppies in the grass, and as I lurched, my untold stories tumbled inside me like pages ripped from a book and tossed, crumpled into a waste paper bin. An overpowering urge to scream my story, to expel it from beginning to end, seized me. Suddenly, I could see the heads of all those Kurds crushed beneath tanks. Descending the slope at a breakneck pace, my shouts crescendoing, I was unable to stop myself, this crazed woman. A final lunge, and I was airborne. Thank you.
Wonderful. There's quite a few scenes in this book that will stay with me for a long time. You do a great job of putting us in that place, and really showcasing what's happening, even when it's something we maybe don't have exposure to or wouldn't be able to imagine on our own. So your book discusses very large scale historical and global problems, but your storytelling really allows us to connect to like the personal struggles of the Kurdish people and Kurdish women, and you really brought their stories to life. Can you talk a little bit about how activism has impacted your writing, and if your writing has impacted or elevated your activism?
I don't know if I feel like they kind of promote each other in the sense that when you have more empathy, you're more willing to go out of your way and help others. Um, and in the way, going out and helping others means you learn their stories, and that helps you write their stories, right? I kind of adapted the story of the people that I met when I was, you know, campaigning for political activists. Not only you get a sense of what life is like inside the prison, I also got to understand how much an imprisonment is not just the prisoner's punishment; it's also their family's punishment, and how it's their share of torture. So they really build on each other. I feel like there is this intersection of empathy and taking a step, and that's where my life is really. Um, I want my reader also to get the sense of maybe I can do something now that I know more. Maybe I can now write to my representative next time there's an attack on a minority group anywhere in the world. And that's very different from the idea of trying to lecture people or trying to shape their decisions or their political identity, because it's such a fine balance. You still want people to go inside and search inside and ask themselves, what is it that I want to do? But you also trying to gently remind them of the humanity of unheard people, because when we don't hear the voice of a group of people, we automatically dehumanize them. They lose their importance. And that's why if you look at our world, I look at whose death we grieve in the world, look at which tragedies we mark. Um, a lot of who we see and who we remember depends on who we have subconsciously accepted as people and unpeople. And so I think the job of literature is to remind us of everyone's humanity, and that shapes, even if you're not a person who goes to the streets to protest or doesn't actually write to their representative, you still will come across someone at a restaurant or a coffee shop who sound different from you, who look different from you, and the way you interact with them would change based on what you've been exposed to in the privacy of your home when you pick up a book and read. Um, so I think for me, they feed off of each other. My literature feeds off of my activism. My activism strengthens my story writing. And I am grateful for that intersection that I found in life.
Thank you. Yeah, there's really heavy topics in the book in some ways, but you handled it all so beautifully. Can you talk a little bit about your choice to approach this from a fiction lens rather than going nonfiction?
That's a very good question, Alina. I actually thought about it for a long time, because when it comes to writing fiction, you can't really go through paragraphs and explain the history, or you can have footnotes or endnotes, right? Your characters can only say things that they would naturally do it. And if you have, a Kurdish character, a minority character speaking to another minority character, there's so much they wouldn't say because they both know. So, as an author, knowing that I'm presenting my work to a world that doesn't really know enough about character, and not wanting to force my characters to have an information dump, there were a lot of tough moments when I thought, oh my God, maybe it was better for me to pick a nonfiction. But the reason I stayed with fiction is because I feel stories are the most direct way to someone's heart. And I feel like true nonfiction, you get a lot of information. And yes, you have a lot of facts, that Kurds are 40 million people and they live here and da da da. But does that mean when you actually see now a person of a minority at work or as your student or anywhere, how you actually change or how you actually deal with them based on information or based on a shift in your heart? And I think stories are very, very powerful in that way. And I love it when I read books that are set in, Asia and Africa. I feel like they're so eye-opening that even when I travel actually to other parts of the world, I won't understand people as much as I do through reading a book, because when I do travel, I have language barriers. I am worried for my safety. I'm worried that I'm making an inappropriate comment or asking a very stupid question, right? But when I pick a book that takes me to this new culture, I learn so much, and I see that practically changes how I treat other people. And so I didn't want information for my readers. I wanted them to see our humanity. And I knew that even though fiction is a very challenging medium, that it would do what I'm searching for. And I look for this heart to heart connection and this heart to heart resuscitation, which I think our world really, really needs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think you still provided a ton of information, but in a really personal way, how it affected, how things like the moral, is it the morality police you talked
Yeah.
about? Um, you could have done a whole section on understanding what that is in a literal sense, but you showed how it impacted a real person. And that'll stay with me because I related that to your character and how that would feel going into a library. You have a scene in a library where there's morality police and there's all this stuff that happens around that. And it just makes it so powerful. So
That's very good to
um,
hear.
you had a question from Tracy on Facebook. They're asking if character development is your character development process different if the character belongs to a group that you yourself as the author don't identify with. So let's say you're a character that is not Kurdish or has that background. For example, do you do research or interviews to get more information about the culture or the group?
Okay. So just because I grew up in the Kurdish culture doesn't know I know everything about it. Your experiences as one person in a body is really limited. So even when you're writing about what is considered your culture, there's still so much research that you have to do. And yes, I love reading, but I think it's more impactful when I actually interview people, when I let them go on and tell me about their stories and their experiences. So there is a lot of research involved in any character that I write about, regardless of whether they are Kurdish or non-Kurdish. And even like within Kurdish, I'm writing right now about the Yazidi minorities, which is a religious minority. And yes, they are Kurdish. I am Kurdish too, but there's so much that I have learned and still I'm learning in the process of writing the story. And I still will have several sensitivity readers to go and read it and make sure that I haven't, done injustice to their story. Because when you are writing about an underrepresented people, misrepresenting them is a great act of betrayal. And so you really have to do everything in your power to try and do justice to their story. And so, yes, there is a lot of research involved in whoever I'm writing about, and that research for me isn't just getting information; it's really digesting the information and feeling their feeling and like understanding how they look at the world and how that's different from the way I look at the world and perceive it. And yeah, I believe writing about other cultures and your culture or whoever has to be done with a great sense of responsibility. Doesn't mean we're perfect, Doesn't mean we won't make mistakes, but it means that we really have to do our best to get that right. And yeah, especially if you're writing about underrepresented people, make sure you don't make things worse for them.
Sure. So your book was recently translated into Kurdish. I'm curious how your book has been received by the Kurdish people, either in Iran or America and Canada.
Okay, so this beautiful book just came out, and I'm so excited to get a copy finally. So I was really worried about that more than anything. I was worried about how other Kurdish women would respond to my book, and I wanted to um, stay true to their stories, and I wanted to avoid what's often done, which is we're either completely overlooked, or we are demonized, or we are romanticized. And I didn't want to romanticize life under oppression. I wanted to offer that nuance. And that can get tricky because obviously not everything is perfect. So, how do you, in a sense, criticize an already marginalized society, right? Because you don't want to pretend that everything is perfect over there. And I wanted to make sure that I try and represent. Uh, I'm worried that my dog is gonna bark. So, that I can write a story that majority, if not all, but a lot of Kurdish women would read it and feel like, oh, this could be my story. And so the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive, and I am so grateful for that. That when a Kurdish woman tells me, "You make me feel heard, you make me feel seen," and that happened right away when the English version came out. And people who could read in English, they read it and reflected that sentiment, and also so much more when the Kurdish version came out. And people say things like, "Oh, every politician should carry a copy of this book and give it to politicians from other parts of the world so they get to know us." And oh, your book is like an encyclopedia of Kurdish culture. And I am very, very grateful for things because God knows I worked really hard to make sure that happens, that it's not that, for example, I had the privilege of getting into a very good university, and then I had the privilege of getting student visa and come out and go to Canada and get a degree in creative writing. But how many people have that opportunity? So I wanted to have a character who's denied those opportunities, and in a way try to represent that larger experience that maybe most Kurdish women go through. But again, I'm just one voice. No matter how much I try to be inclusive, I can only represent a small group of us. And I really hope that there will be, and looks like there are more and more Kurdish women who are writing the stories.
Yeah. So yeah, you were actually, if I'm right, you're the first Kurdish woman to write a book in English, and you also gave a very moving speech at the United Nations. I was just really impressed by that. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of being a voice for the voiceless, and specifically the importance of sharing stories of Kurdish women? That feels like it's a very heavy responsibility. How does that impact you going forward in your writing?
So we have a lot of Kurdish poets who write in English, and we also have a lot of Kurdish academics that write academic papers and academic books. It's just novel that somehow happens to become my area. In terms of representing voiceless groups, again, you really have to do it with two things from what I've learned. On one hand, you don't want to just represent one group. You want to be a force that eradicates voicelessness. So don't just say, let me represent this group to the best of my abilities. Try to make sure you're part of that force that says everyone deserves to get a voice. Every group, especially the groups that we haven't heard of, deserve to tell their stories, because it's not just that we do justice to them by giving them a chance to tell their story. We also, the rest of us, will grow by learning from all these different cultures and all of that. And then the other thing is just a double awareness that even though I want to have the privilege of just telling my story, the fact is, when you belong to such a heavily oppressed group, it's not really just your story. It's everyone's stories. When I was interviewing political prisoners, I realized how confident they were in saying that I live to tell. I have to go and tell the stories. And in their mind, none of the things that I dealt with made any sense. They weren't afraid that they're not doing a good job. They weren't afraid of um, who am I saying and what am I saying. They said this horrible thing happened in a prison. No one was there. No one recorded this. I was there. I survived this, and I want to tell it. I will say it to anyone who listens to me in any shape and form possible. So in that sense, I was really inspired by their determination to tell the stories without a lot of fear and doubt and hesitations. And so I am aware that whether or not I want it, I am in a sense representing, and I um, try to to do a good job at this. But at the same time, I know that I'm just one voice. That the Kurdish group, there's like 40 million of us. Like imagine that's the population of Canada, coast to coast, and we don't speak in one voice. We have a variety of outlooks and perspectives, and I can only do so much.
Thank you. That's the last of our questions from our attendees. I just want to ask what you have coming up next. Do you have other books that you're working on? Where can we find what you do next and keep up with your work?
Thank you. Well, for now, make sure you do have your copy of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. The $20 you spend goes a long way in helping me continue writing, because unfortunately, all publishers look at is the sales number. It's not just about reviews and how much you resonated with people, but how many you actually sold. I am writing another novel. I've been working on it for over 3 years now. Um, I'm still going through several drafts, and I feel like again there is like so much that I discover more about these characters as I write their stories, and I'm thinking of trying to represent different ways, because perceiving the same reality, because I'm looking at the life of refugees and immigrants in North America, and I try to make sure that it's not just one way of going through this experience, but also several ways of looking at that experience. And so there is an element of this one is a love story. The first one was a sibling story. This one is a couple's story, a love story, and there's an element of mystery to it, but there's also a lot of history and politics and hidden layers of the novel. So I don't know how long it will be before I actually have another book out in the world, but in the meantime, I love how much I'm learning from this writing and research that I'm doing.
Thank you. And I love how much we are learning from you. So thank you for that. I look forward to your next story. If it's anything as wonderful as this one, I'm thrilled to be able to read it. So thank you for sharing your work with us today. We're so thrilled that you got to be here with us and that we got to have you. This is our first full day of the Fox Cities Book Festival. So for everybody who's joining us, if you have not registered for the upcoming events, please, you are able to do that now and right up until the event at any time. So feel free to join us. We have a great lineup of authors all the way through Sunday. And thank you, Ava, for spending the time with us today. And I'm just really, really pleased that we were here to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Alani, for hosting this event. Thanks to Fox Cities, everyone who's working behind the scenes to make this happen. Thank you to the audience, whether you're on Facebook, Zoom, watching us live or watching us later. I am grateful for your time.
Well, grateful to you too. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.